Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. And may I ask you a quick favor? If you like Live Like a Leader.show, will you please give us a 5-star rating, give us a good comment, tell some friends about it? We would love to get the word out about the show. We've crossed over 100 episodes and we want to get these conversations out to more people who would love to hear them. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for giving us a good rating. And today we have with us Jim Britt. Jim is a 15 times best-selling author. He's got 12 international bestsellers. He's in the world's most influential, top 15 most influential speakers, and in the top 20 success coaches in the world. He's spoken at over 5,000 events in 31 countries. And yes, it took him more than a few days to be able to say that. So Jim, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
My pleasure. Now, it did take me more than a few days. It took me a few decades.
Yeah, to do that, huh? Well, okay. Yeah. I'm a little ways behind you, but I'm doing my best.
All right.
So Jim, let me just start out with because that's such a broad perspective that you now have, having been to so many events and done so many things and worked with so many leaders globally. If I were to just ask you, what is one of the biggest takeaways that you've learned from your experience of being this guy who's written all these books and spoken at all these events and been to all these countries? You know, what's one of your biggest insights out of this whole ride that you've been on?
I think one is probably that everybody has the ability and talent to do almost anything they want to do, as long as they hone that ability and really believe in themselves and have the confidence to move forward. But I think, looking at my background, I'm surprised sometimes that I've done what I've done. So if I can do it, anybody can do it,
Yeah. Well, from the outside, you seem superhuman. So tell us a little bit more about that. Tell us why would you say that?
Well, I'm a high school dropout. I grew up in a very poor family. We weren't, I wouldn't say we were poverty stricken, but pretty close. Well, we didn't have electricity until I was 6. And I didn't know we didn't have electricity because we never had it.
So, yeah, because who has electricity?
I lived in the backwoods of Oklahoma, and they just never bothered to run power lines down where we lived, I guess. So, but we moved around a lot too. But I ended up dropping out of the high school at about halfway through the 10th grade. So I have no formal education, but I started to get my education in my mid-20s, reading books. Took a speed reading course. I went through almost 4,000 books. But prior to that, I got introduced to my first business venture, which was a direct sales company. And I'd never done anything other than pick cotton, pump gas, and worked in a factory on an assembly line. That was it. And so I get into this direct sales company, and the fellow says, well, your job is talking to people. He said, if you talk a little, you learn a little. If you talk a lot, you learn a lot. I said, well, how much is a lot? He said, 10 a day. Of course, we didn't have internet or anything, so I had to go out and physically find 10 people to talk to. He didn't tell me what to say, what to ask, anything. Just go talk to people. So I took that to heart, quit my full-time job, gave him a week's notice, went full-time into direct sales, started talking to 10 people a day. I did that for a year. I made one sale. And the only other things I sold was my some of my furniture, my boat, my pickup, my camper, some fishing equipment, a couple of guns to survive. Because at the end of that year, I had talked to every day 10 people. So I talked to over 3,650 people and made one sale. And I'd never forget, I'm standing in my kitchen, looking out the window, and I think, what am I going to do? I thought, I don't know what to do. Here I am, I'm broke.
Yeah.
My home had been foreclosed. I had 5 days. I had a notice on the door from the sheriff. Got to be out in 5 days. Both of my vehicles had been repoed. Some of my furniture had been taken. They even repoed my Kirby vacuum cleaner. I couldn't even pay for that. It was like $4 a month or something. And and I had a wife and a child, and I had 15 cents in my pocket, and that was it. And I didn't know what to do. And
Wow.
I thought,
Wow.
I'm standing there going, maybe I just go take my job back at the factory. And I knew they would hire me back, and I thought, well, I don't even have a way to get there. I have no transportation. And then I thought a little bit more, and I'm going, no, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to make this work. And I needed money for food for the next few days. And I didn't know what was going to happen after that, but I had no vehicle. So I was selling cleaning products. So the one customer I sold
Was
about
with
6 months prior, I went in my garage, I grabbed a 5-gallon pail of carpet shampoo, the same that I'd sold him before, and I carried it 3 miles roughly in the Oklahoma heat. And if you carried 5 gallons of stuff very far, about every 50 yards, you got to sit
is
down.
heavy.
And
Yeah.
a couple of times I sat down and just broke down because I didn't know what to do. And I was just praying that he would buy this. It was like $20 or something. And sure enough, when I get there, he bought it. And so I was feeling pretty good. I had $20 to buy some food. Back then, you could get a grocery a cart full of food for $20. And
Yeah.
but before I left his office, he said, you have a minute? He said, my brother and I would like to talk to you because I worked for him during 8th and ninth grade in school and half the 10th grade. And in the ninth grade, we built a home in a carpentry class. So we cut all the boards, measured everything, built a home for the school, and they sold it. And so I learned all the trades. And he was the biggest builder in Oklahoma City. And so he called me back to his office, and I didn't know what for. And he said, we really like you. He said, you've saved me a lot of money. He said, you're out there cleaning up around the job sites, but he said, you're always fixing things. You're finding things that the contractors miss. The doors are too wide or too narrow and things like that. He said, you saved me a lot of money. And he said, we like you and we trust you and we'd like to do something with you. He said, we'd like to build an apartment complex together. I said, oh man, I'm doing okay, but I don't have the money to invest. And he said, no, we're going to invest in you. We want to try something. He said, we want you to build this 52-unit apartment complex. And he said, if you finish in 14 months, he said, that's about normal for this type of project. He said, we're going to pay you $300 a week while you're building. We're going to pay you a little bit of bonus for a couple of things that you do. He said, but if you finish early, if you finish in 12 months, which is pretty not likely, but if you do, he said, we're going to give you a $60,000 bonus. And he said, and every day you go past that 12 months, you lose $1,000 a day until you hit 14 months. So he said, you might make 5,000, 10,000. He said, and every day you finish earlier than that 12 months, he said, we're going to pay you an extra $1,000 a day. He said, which is unlikely. And he said, and we'll furnish you a vehicle, all your expenses, and a 3-bedroom furnished apartment if you need it. So everything I needed was given to me right there. I had an income, I had a vehicle, I had an apartment, I had furniture, and income coming in. I had an opportunity. And I took the plan. I said yes. And I took the plans home that night. Had no idea if I could even build this thing or not. But I said yes, and I think I'm going to figure out how. So I opened the plans up, and I'm looking at them, and I'm going, they give me a list of contractors. Here's one cement contractor we use, electrical contractor, and so on. So I'm looking at that, and I'm going, there's 8 buildings in this project. I said, I'm not going to use one contractor to build a whole, to do all the framing and all the concrete. I'm going to hire 8 of them.
Right.
And I'm going to do one per building. Yeah. Long story short, I built it in 8 months until it went from ground up in 8 months. I mean, it was stress, man, because I didn't know what I was doing half the time. And I kind of did. You got to put the floor in before you put the walls up. But still, I've never done anything to that, that capacity, a 2-story building, all of this stuff. So So anyway, I ended up in that length of time in 8 months. Not only did I earn what they were paying me, but I almost earned $500,000 from them. They were blown away. They just couldn't believe. They probably couldn't afford to pay all that bonus really, but they did. And a
Yeah.
percentage if I ownership if I finished in 12 months. So
Wow.
and then when I got back home that day, my wife was all elated because I had everything we needed. But 2 hours later, there was a knock on the door. And it was a man from the direct sales company. He said, I understand you're a hard worker, but you're not making any money. He said, can we talk? Came in, sat on my floor because I didn't have any sofas or anything that had all been taken. And we spent 2 hours together, never saw him again. He told me what I needed to be doing, what I was doing wrong. And my direct sales business on the side while I was building these apartments took off like a rocket. So within 12 months, I went from 15 cents in my pocket to millionaire in 1 year. And when I look back on it, it's because I
Wow.
wouldn't give up. So that's kind of the way I started. And what really came out of the direct sales company, you've heard of Jim Rohn, right?
I love Jim Rohn.
Jim
Yes.
Rohn was the trainer in that company. And
Yeah.
we ended up becoming best of friends. And later, we're in business together for about 8 years. I started out promoting him. That's how I ended up in the speaking business.
Uh,
So, yeah, so
and what was that company? Can I ask?
Adventures in Achievement. That was the name of our
Adventures
company,
in
Adventures in
Achievement was the
Achievement. Yeah.
direct sales company.
Oh, the direct sales.
That's so
No,
funny.
that
And
was Jim Rohn and
the
I's
direct,
company. Yeah. The direct sales was
oh,
Best
okay,
Line. Best Line.
Best Line,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was cleaning products or
Cleaning
something.
products. It was kind of a knockoff of Amway, kind of. We had 7
Okay,
products, and actually we got bigger than Amway. But then the owner of the company made some
yeah,
mistakes, and they closed it down, and that's how I ended up in business with Jim Rohn a year or two later. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that is a heck of a story, and I love the takeaway. Don't quit. You
Yeah.
know, how glad are you that you lugged that 5 gallons
Oh.
up to those guys? And you know,
One of the hardest
you
things
know,
I that was one of the hardest things. I mean, people say, "Oh, well, how do you handle rejection today?" I said, "Well, I don't have to do that
yeah,
anymore because I did it 3,650 times because that's how many no's I got." So,
yeah,
but you know what
yeah,
I learned from that too, and in any kind of business, not just direct sales, but leadership. A good leader, their objective should be to develop good leaders. And there's so many people
yeah,
today that they're almost afraid to find somebody better than they are, teach them everything they know for fear that they'll pass it by. And I
yeah,
was kind of the opposite. I wanted to find somebody better than me, teach them everything I know, and let them take off. And
yeah,
I still have that philosophy today, is just helping people excel. That's really what I do. So hopefully I'm creating more
yeah.
leaders. And
Well,
even as a family, I've got 6 sons, and
uh-huh.
teaching them, not specifically saying you're a leader, but realizing that I'm a leader. Uh, and as a leader of the family, you've got to influence your children to become leaders in some capacity.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
all 4 of mine, 2 from my first marriage, but 4 of mine are all entrepreneurs. And
Yeah.
because I taught a class on entrepreneurship. My wife homeschooled our 4 boys, and first 2 were college graduates, and they did really really well.
Well, so what as a dad myself with a pretty young son, what do you think one or two of the key things you taught your sons are? Like here you are, you're Jim Britt, you're this best-selling author and trainer of leaders and coach and everything. How, what was that like for your kids growing up, and for you, what were you trying to accomplish with them?
A lot of it that they learned was just through observation, watching me,
Yeah.
but also in classes like where I taught entrepreneurship. I don't think I even called it entrepreneurship. Maybe I did. I can't remember. It's been a while back. But you know, remember the first one. I said that, okay, what's the foundation of being an entrepreneur? And of course, they didn't have an answer, at that point. And I said, well, the foundation is
Right.
integrity. I said, if you don't have integrity, nothing works, because integrity builds trust. Trust builds openness. Openness builds bonds, and bonds build relationships. And that's what business is all about, is building relationships. That's what life is all about. So so I said, let's just take integrity. And I talked more about it. And I said, now I want you to come back next week. We're going to spend about 30 minutes of our hour and a half talking about how you would apply integrity to a business or to your life. And I did that uh, every week. That's kind of what I taught them, just those basic things. And
Yeah.
and one of my sons at the time was only, I think the youngest was 11 at the time. And um, I remember one day I said, when you get older, you're going to think I'm smarter. As you get older, you'll think I'm smarter. and, and he looked at me kind of funny, and he said, well, Dad, he said, I think you're the smartest man ever. And I went, wow, you don't realize what your kids are thinking.
That's
Sometimes
so
you think,
sweet.
oh, Dad's really
Yeah.
dumb, because a teenager or a pre-teenager. But yeah, it was kind of
Right.
fun.
That's really sweet. That's awesome. Well,
Yeah, but
and
I think
I
even
love that. I
somebody
mean, I
that's,
think that,
I was going to say, somebody that has a job working for a company, certainly nothing wrong with that. If that's what you love doing, just like my first two sons, that's what they do. One's a big executive at
yeah.
Microsoft, and one's works for a division of some tech company. I forget now the name of it, but they both do really well, and they love what they do, and they're computer geniuses, and um, but um, I think if you're working for a company, the if you want promotions and raises and things like that, become an entrepreneur and act
Yes.
like an entrepreneur. Act like you own a portion of that company, because in a sense you do, even though you don't, maybe. But but work like you do own a portion of it. Just like when I was in the
Yeah.
factory, they rated everybody on efficiency. I wired telephone switchboards with a lot of different wire connections. So let's say you had a foot by foot panel that had 1,000 wire connections on it. Some of them would. They'd give you a certain amount of time to wire that panel, and if you did it
Yeah.
in the time they allowed it, you made 100%. And if you drop below 85, they could fire you. If you went over 100,
Uh-huh.
you could get a little tiny bonus. Well, there were 9,000 employees in that factory. By the time I was probably in there 6 to 8 months, and my highest efficiency was 457%. So I was doing the job of 4.57 people. And
Wow.
nobody had ever done that in the factory. Nobody.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't do it because I wanted to beat anybody else. I did it because I just wanted to be better. I wanted to be better than I was yesterday or last month.
Yeah.
Always striving to accomplish
Yeah.
more of myself. I did that picking cotton, even, or pumping gas. It was
Yeah.
I was always striving to just be better than what I did before.
Well, I love what you said, the first word about entrepreneurship, and I think it applies to entrepreneurship and I think it applies to life, is integrity. That's without integrity nothing works.
That's right.
And with integrity, like you said, you can build trust, which builds openness, which builds bonds, which leads to relationships, which is what business is all about. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's the same whether you're an entrepreneur, an entrepreneur at a company, outside of a company, talking about friends, talking about family. I mean, I think that's a fundamentally just that is a great place to begin,
Well,
is with
if you think
integrity.
about it, let's say when I met my wife 40 years ago, 41 years ago, um, I didn't walk up to her and say, hey, babe, you want to get married? When I
Yeah.
first met her, I
Uh-huh.
I asked questions. She asked questions. We got to know each other. And once she feels that I had integrity, now she trusts me to be more open.
Yeah.
And the more open you are with someone, the more of a bond you're going to create with that person. And the more of a bond
Yeah.
that you create, the more it's going to create that relationship. So it
Yeah.
works in every area of your life. And people can feel
And
it.
I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, Jim, because like maybe like you, I work with a lot of top leaders and top executives, and I think one of the biggest things that they can do is to demonstrate a little vulnerability
Sure.
and not always, be everything's fine and I'm not talking about go complain and whine and stuff. I like to call it took me a decade to come up with this term, Jim, but I call it insightful vulnerability.
Mm.
Like share with us a difficulty that you had and what you learned from it,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, and when you started this whole conversation out with that, telling us about probably one of the lowest moments in your life. But that doesn't make me think less of you. It makes me think more of you because I got to see that experience and go through it with you and learn yet again the power of just not giving up, right?
Yeah, because people sometimes will look at you and say, "Yeah, well, you just had a silver spoon in your mouth. You must have had
Right.
everything given to you." But people don't realize that you know. Well, I've had a lot of people say to me, "Well, you don't understand what I'm going through." I'm going, "Yeah, I do,
Yeah.
because I've been through it. You just name it.
Yeah.
How long
Yeah.
have you ever picked cotton? Well, no. Have you ever lived without electricity? Well, no. How about with no running water? How about with
Yeah.
an outhouse? How about have you ever
Yeah.
gone through divorce?
Yeah.
Yes, I have. Is it?
Yeah.
It's um, that people think that they have a big problem, and they may have, but there's another billion people on the planet with the same problem. Because there's only about six problems in the whole world, and another billion
Yeah.
people have them. It's not like there's 8 billion
Yeah.
problems. So
Yeah.
it's and when they can relate to you, if I'm up speaking, I can either have the audience saying in their mind, "Well, so what," or I could have them saying, "Me too." So they
Yeah.
relate to you
Yeah.
because you're open and you tell a story, and they can relate to the story and they can relate to where you've been. Maybe not exactly where you've been, but similar situations. So I think that's so important in leadership, and it's just the mark of a good leader, I think.
I totally agree. I
Yeah.
totally agree. Yeah, I think that the leaders that I remember best are the leaders who were open with me and vulnerable with me and told me good stories and cared about my development, you know.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's I think the mark of great leaders. And it goes back to what you said a little bit ago that I think the job of good leaders is to develop other good leaders.
Yeah. That's how a
Yeah,
company
that's
grows.
key.
That's how everything, company, and a small company, a large company, a family. That's how they grow. Otherwise, you're kind of stifled by the ability of somebody at the top that may not have the same ability that you have, but you may have
Yeah.
something else that you do even better than that person, and they should really help you cultivate that and grow in that area. So it just helps the whole organization.
When when I had my company, when I was one of four co-founders at a company called bigwords.com, that was one of the companies that I was a founder of. And when we got our first investment, they handed us the money and they said, now, guys, remember, B people hire C people because they want to look good.
Hmm.
A people hire A plus people because they're not afraid of learning something and they want to get the job done right.
Yeah.
BA people. And I got to say that was one of our biggest successes there, is that we hired A people, and we ultimately ended up, talk about going through some difficult things. I almost died of an autoimmune disease when we lost that company. We went under in the .com crash on October 20th of 2000. But we went under because the market had changed and we were not going to be profitable fast enough for our investors.
Right.
But everything that we had done that was really, truly great, we accomplished because we hired A plus people, and
Yeah, I totally
that
agree
was
with that.
a
That's
big,
great philosophy. Great philosophy. Yeah.
yeah. Well, you know, you've been in 31 countries on 5,000 stages. What are some things that if you, as you look back on this, what are some things that have surprised you? Like, do you have any, like, did something weird and surprising happen in this country that we've never heard of? Or did you notice similarities everywhere that stood out to you? Or,
And I think humans are humans, and they have similarities. They have differences, but some of the differences are just maybe you speak Spanish and I speak English, but we both speak a
yeah,
language, so that doesn't really make
yeah,
us different. But what I discovered over time is that you've heard of that 80-20 rule.
yeah,
Um,
yes.
so I forget what it's called now, but anyway, um, I was contemplating that one day, and I asked myself, what the heck's wrong with the 80%? How come they don't follow through with what they say they're going to do? And
Uh-huh.
I thought, that's weird. That you would maybe spend the money to go to an event to learn a certain thing, or go buy a book or a program, or hire a coach or
Yeah.
whatever to learn certain things, and then you don't use it. And the next year,
Yeah.
right where you were the last year. And I thought, wow,
Yeah.
that's weird. I thought, I got to figure that one out. So, and I did in one day, about 35 years ago. And and it started with, I thought, okay, we're all human, but then I thought, but what makes us different is we get programmed differently. And it starts with our parents, but our parents typically teach us the basics: how to walk, how to talk,
Yeah.
how to put on your clothes, how to maybe swim or ride a bicycle, or how to tie your shoes or whatever, basic stuff. And
Yeah.
as we repeat those over and over and over and perfect them, like watching a kid learn to talk is a good example, or walk. They say a word, you can barely understand it. Pretty soon you can understand it, and it's two words, then it's three, then it's a sentence that's half put together. But before long, they put it together, and now they're talking your ear off. So
Yeah.
once you perfect that programming, it becomes a habit pattern that's second nature to you, that you don't have to think about anymore. So I guarantee you that if you got up this morning and you put on a pair of pants, you put the same leg in first every single time, and you've done it since you learned how to put on a pair of pants. And when you take them off, you take the
Yeah.
same leg out first every single time, because it's a habit.
Yeah.
You get in your car, you don't have to think about, how do I drive this thing? You've already been programmed to drive it. You got to be aware, but still, you've been programmed. You don't have to think about it. So I thought, okay, well, it'd be hard to live our lives without those second nature habits, because I mean, it'd just be too much. I have to relearn things every time. So we may have 100 of those or more.
Yeah.
I don't know. And then I thought, okay, how do we end up where we are? And I thought, well, that's based upon what you believe to be true in the past that you acted upon, brought you where you are today. It's called the law of cause and effect. And I thought, well, how do you remember your past? And I thought, well, you don't remember everything. It'd be kind of impossible, because you have literally probably tens of millions of programs in your brain. We're creating a new one right now with
Yeah.
our conversation. It'll forever be in your brain, forever be in my brain, and whoever's listening will forever be in their brain.
Yeah.
Um, so, but what we remember in the past is we remember the emotional highlights. A beautiful vacation, a child being
Yeah.
born, when you launched your company, you got your driver's license, you got your first kiss, your first date. We remember all of those things because they were highlights in our life, and they were emotional.
Yeah.
So the emotional ones seem to be stored more closely to the surface of your subconscious, so you can access them and maybe reminisce about them pretty quickly. The next moment, I thought, though, we don't all just have beautiful experiences in our life. In fact, we all have negative experiences. And as a child, all you want to do is be happy and joyful. That's it. And you
Yeah.
want to play and just enjoy yourself and be happy. Anything that interferes with that. And there's a lot of trauma that goes on, which is shocking for a child. Some children are abandoned, grow up in an orphanage and foster homes, not knowing who their parents are or what's next in their life. Some are abused verbally and physically and sexually. Some grow up in a household with an alcoholic parent or a drug abuser. Some grow up watching their father abuse their mother. All kinds of things happen, and we don't think about that if it's not happening to us, but it's happening all over the place. And children, they don't want to feel that. So what they do is they learn to suppress it, and mostly through avoidance. They don't know they're suppressing. They don't say that, but they are. And it shows up.
Yeah.
You'll really see it when they get into school. And if you go look at 6-year-olds on the playground, especially after a few days of school, they gravitate into groups. And you got the group of bullies over here. You got the mean guys over here that doesn't bully anybody, but they just think they're tough. And then you got the most popular girl in school, and she needed to be popular because she never got the attention growing up. So she figured out how to do it in school. And she's got about 8 or 10 girls around her that want to rub it up against her so that they can feel like they're popular and they can say, Mary's my best friend. Then you got the silent one over there that's afraid to approach anybody, afraid they'll get rejected. And all of these personalities.
Yeah.
And what happens is, let's say that somebody grows up, they didn't get attention growing up, never felt loved. So they grow up with this internal belief system that nobody loves me. And whatever you believe to be true about yourself, whether it's true or not, it's true for you. You will fight to the death to prove to yourself and the outside world that what you believe is true. And even if it's not, because all beliefs really are false anyway, they're opinions, but yet when we believe it, that's what we act upon. So somebody that thinks nobody loves them, what do you think is going to happen when they become an adult? They may get into relationships that come and go, or they may never get into a relationship. But all they complain about is, I'm lonely, I want a relationship, I want a good man, I want a good woman. But deep inside, they don't feel worthy of that. And that's their life. And the next person grows up, without money. And the next person grows up, being watching their father abuse their mother. So they grow up to be either an abuser or a victim. And it shows up everywhere. So you wonder why that 80% don't follow through, is because every decision you make about what you want in your life, I don't care if you want to lose weight or get healthy and join the gym or make more money, it doesn't matter what area of your life, every decision you make is filtered through your own core belief that you don't know you have. You have certain beliefs. You may be good at, making money, or good at fishing or playing golf or whatever. But that's a lot of external beliefs. With that core inside, everything gets filtered through that. Let's say that, and your core belief acts kind of like a Google, your own personal Google. So let's say you tried 10 times and failed to lose 50 pounds. And this year you go, I'm losing that 50 pounds no matter what. You just pass that decision through your Google, pops up the 10 times you've tried and failed. You're already off track and don't know it. Because it's your whispering, the little silent whisper going, hey, remember how hard that was? Remember when you couldn't eat potato chips anymore in front of TV? Remember how you had to go on a diet? Remember how you couldn't have burgers anymore? Remember how hard it was in the gym and you quit after 2 weeks? So all of that dialogue is happening in your brain, and you're already off track. So when I saw
Yeah.
that, I thought, that's the problem. That's the problem that everybody has. I thought, I got to develop two things. One, how do you help somebody discover what that core belief is? That took me about 4 or 5 months. Two, how do you help them take the emotional attachment off of that core belief so it becomes one of those dormant files in your brain? Kind of like a file on your hard drive. It's there, but you don't look at it every day. It's not on your desktop. That took me about another 4 or 5 months. Then it took me about a year to get good at it. And so now that's really what I focus on. I don't care if I'm working with business people or individuals, is focusing on what's your core belief and how do you take the emotional attachment off of it? Because the shocking thing I found, the first time I have a program called The Power of Letting Go, a live event as well as online. But the first time I presented that to about 500 people, I was absolutely floored at how many people had gone through traumatic, really bad traumatic event.
Yeah.
80, 90% of it. Terrible, just terrible stuff.
Yeah.
I was in disbelief. And maybe
Yeah.
it's because all of them had it and they came because of that reason. And maybe the percentage is not that high out there, but it still is pretty high. Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's the problem.
Well, and you've got a website, poweroflettinggo.com, right?
I do, yeah. That's powerlettinggo.com.
And,
I have a 32 audio series, about 16 hours long. And
uh-huh.
I just re-recorded it. I had it for a long time, but I re-recorded it recently, updated it. It's simply because I'm listening to the old recording, kind of perusing through it, and I found that I was referring to cassette tapes to the next cassette. So I thought I better
That's
update
really
this.
funny.
So I did. So
Yeah.
anyways, about 16 hours on there, and it covers pretty much anything anybody's going through, not only what they're going through, how it happened, and how to resolve it. And if you're listening
Great.
here, if you go to powerlettinggo.com, just put in your email and name, and you can have the first 2 sessions for free. It's
Yeah.
and the first 2 sessions will change your whole outlook on life or business, either
That's
one.
fabulous.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. So yeah, poweroflettinggo.com,
Yeah.
and you can get the first 2 sessions for free.
Yeah.
And then if they want to find you, it's Jim Britt, JIMBRITT.com.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, so I promised I'd get you out of here at the top of the hour, so we have a few more minutes left. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you would love
How
to
long do
talk
we have?
about, or that I should have? We have about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'll tell you a story. And I actually, this in part is on those first 2 lessons of Power Letting Go. But I think it's, in case somebody doesn't go download those,
Yeah.
I think it's really critical to understand it. Years back, probably 35 years ago. So I was, a friend of mine and I used to read some of the same books. And then we'd get on the phone or something and talk about them. And he called me one day and he said, would you go to page 87 on this book and read it and let's discuss it? He said, I'm really stuck on what they mean. So it was a very in-depth book. So I said yes, and I read it, and we had about an hour-long conversation on that one page. And at the end of the conversation, though, he says, hey, Jim, he said, what do you think the word resourceful means? I said, man, I don't know. I never really thought about it. I said, maybe being more productive or making good decisions or being more, using your imagination or something like that. I said, I don't know why. He said, oh, it's just an interesting word. I said, yeah, I guess so. And we hung up. And later that day, I was driving home and I couldn't quit thinking about that word. And of course, there was no internet. So I went in and grabbed my dictionary and I looked up the word resourceful. And it was defined as once again full of source. Once again full of source. I'm going, depending on what you think source is, that's pretty powerful. And then I thought, oh, I'll look up the word source, the keyword in there. So I looked up source, and it was defined as where all things originate. Not some things, but all things originate in source. Wow. Depending on what you think source is, that could be pretty powerful. And then I went to the bookstore a few days later, and I looked at another dictionary. I was trying to find another definition of source. And I looked and I looked and I looked at origin of words. I went into libraries. I went, for the next year and a half, periodically, I was always, looking. If I was buying a book, I was looking for that another definition of source. Could never find it. And I was over in the UK presenting a string of seminars over there, and we were in this little town called Chester, and walking down the street on a break, just kind of relaxing and enjoying the day. And I look and I see a sign on the back door of this building. It said antique books. I thought, oh, I like old books, and I bet they have more older books here than we do in the U.S. So I wandered into the back door. First thing I see is a dictionary about a foot thick, and it had a sign that said, "Do not open." And I had to justify it by thinking, well, if I tear it up or break it or whatever, I'll have to buy it. But I thought, well, maybe it's just the people in the UK shouldn't open it. Maybe I'm okay because I'm a tourist. So anyway, I opened the book and I go to the S's. I was careful, and I go to the S's and I look up source, and it had three of the same things I'd seen before. I thought, there's nothing different here. And suddenly it was like two words popped out of the page, just like that's all you could see on that page, really. There's more than that, but it just popped out. And it said source, love. I went, wow, once again, full of love. So I left there in a little while, and I thought, bought a couple of old books, and I left there and I'm going, how do you apply that to your life, to your business? Source is love, where all things originate in source. And I thought, oh, when you make a decision to do something, you make a firm 100% decision to have something in your life or create something in your life, it creates passion. And passion comes from falling in love with it. So you really fall in love with what it is you want to accomplish. And so you're falling in where all things originate. And your only other option is to fall in fear with it. And you've heard probably many times the two emotions that we experience in life is love and fear. So that started bouncing around in my head. And I thought, wait a minute, there's a flaw in this. This can't be right. I said, because if all things originate in love, where does fear come from? It didn't say some things except for fear. It said all things. I thought about that for about 15 minutes, walking along, and I'm going, oh, I get it. You fall in love with fear. You create it in your own mind. It's not real. You decide that. You start to believe in your fear, and you believe in it so strongly that you're in love with it. And what does it say? What you fear will come upon you? And it does, because that's what you're focused on.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And the amazing thing is that fear is not real. None of it is. Even if a bear is chasing you through the woods, what you make up in your mind is what's going to happen if he catches you. You don't know for sure. That bear may lick you.
Yeah.
I'd probably run too, but still, it's made up in your mind. You get up on a height building someplace and you get close to the edge. Well, you're making something up in your mind that if I fall, I'm going to die. But those kind of fears, I'd say, are more things that you want to pay attention to. But the fears we have of business and personal relationships and stepping up and taking a risk and things like that, it's all made up.
Yeah.
And it's so amazing that we're afraid of our own thought process. We're afraid of our own thoughts. We create fear out of our own thoughts. It's just crazy, isn't it? But we do it all the time.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, no, that's
and then
that's
good. Right after that event, I left the UK and I flew to Toronto for an event. And so the guy that I was doing the event with was the one that asked me about resourceful, actually. And so we went out for a walk during our 2 hour break, and we're coming back, and on the way back, I had this all of a sudden this guy right on my shoulder. Now I'm 6'4". My friend's about 6'2". We're walking really fast, trying to get back to the hotel on time. This guy was keeping up in step with me, and I could smell him. I mean, he was right on my shoulder. I mean, like right here. I could just, my peripheral vision, I could see him. And he was talking to himself with 2 different voices. And I was about ready to turn around and go, "Hey, buddy, back off just a little bit." But before I did, he said, "And God created man." And the other voice said, "I know that." He said, "Yeah, but then God created woman." He said, "Well, I know that too." The other voice, he said, "But then God created fruit." He said, "Fruit? What does that have to do with anything?" And he said, "Well, inside the fruit, there's a seed." And he said, "If you plant it and nourish it, it will grow. And if you don't, it won't." And then he took off the other direction. And I thought, wow, what a message. After what I just went through in the UK, that if you take the seed that you created of what you fell in love with and plant it and keep the weeds out of negativity and fear and doubt and all of those things, if you keep those out, it'll grow. And if you don't, it won't. That's something.
Yeah, that's something. Jim, you've got great stories.
I love telling stories. Jim Rohn taught me that. He said, if you want to become a good speaker, he said, become a gatherer of stories. He says,
yes,
because they'll remember your point that you gave them if you tell a story around it. If you just tell the point, yeah. So he was a master at that.
No, in one ear, out the other.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your stories. And if you want to follow Jim Britt, find Jim Britt. He's at JimBritt, JimBritt.com. And if you want to hear the first 2 sessions of poweroflettinggo.com, you can go to poweroflettinggo.com and download them.
Sure.
So, Jim, I will look forward to keeping in touch with you. And I really, really thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. It was great to be here. Thanks so much, John.
Awesome. And thank you for listening. We'll hear you next time on livelikealeader.show. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.